Alright, UFC Fight Night, January 11th, Dern versus Ribas, full card predictions. Starting with the first fight of the early prelims, Nurullo Aliev versus Solecki. Aliev, undefeated. He's a younger fighter, he's a bigger fighter. He's been able to out-wrestle his opponents historically, like his first and only UFC fight against Razak-Alhassan, which was about, I think, almost 2 years ago now. And Solecki 13-5. So I'm picking Aliev. Solecki was easily out-wrestled in his last fight against Grant Dawson. And he doesn't really have any good wins at lightweight, so I'm just going to pick the big favorite prospect. Next fight up the card, we've got Dudakova versus Fatima Kline. Interesting fight. Both of them undefeated going into the last fight. But for some reason, even though they both lost the last fight, Dudakova is a massive underdog. And I don't know why. She's a much more technical striker than Fatima Kline is, and Fatima Kline's whole game is grappling. She's an ADCC grappler, but didn't really have a good competition before the UFC, and in her only UFC fight, she hasn't been able to make the grappling work. She wasn't able to out-grapple Jasmine Jasdovicius, even though with short notice, wasn't able to make her game plan come to fruition. And she's still a massive favorite, minus 900 against Victoria Dudakova. And for that reason, I'm going to pick Dudakova. Maybe Vegas knows something that I don't. Maybe she's injured or had some illness going to the fight. But I don't think Kline is that good. I think Dudakova is actually pretty solid. She arguably won her last fight, and Kline did not arguably win her last fight. She clearly lost. So I'm going to take Dudakova to win. I've just seen better from her in the UFC. I know her first fight was kind of a fluke. Her opponent broke her arm in I think 40 seconds, but in her fight at UFC 294 in Abu Dhabi, she actually looked pretty good. So I'm taking her to win, and she had staff in that fight and still looked pretty good. So I think if things go her way in the striking, she'll win. And Kline hasn't been able to take her opponent into the grappling historically in the UFC. All right, that's a lot of words for a not very exciting fight. Next fight on the card, Magomed Gadzhiyasulov versus Bruno Lopes. I'm going to go with Magomed. I'm going to call him that. I don't know if I got his last name right. He's undefeated. He's 9-0. In his last fight, he beat Brendan Ribeiro, or Ribeiro, however you say it. And Bruno Lopes, 13-1. Only loss is to, guess who? Brendan Ribeiro. So Lopes, 13-1. Good record. Probably a pretty decent prospect, but he's a UFC debutant. He's never fought in the UFC before. Gadzhiyasulov, I think he's 2-0 in the UFC. The guys he's beaten in the UFC include the only guy who's beaten Lopes. So I'm going to take Magomed Gadzhiyasulov in that fight. Next fight of the card, another women's fight. Nicolle Caliari versus Ernesta Kareckaite. Caliari hasn't lost in 5 years. I think she's on a 4 or 5 fight winning streak. She's a striker, primarily. She's at a Muay Thai gym, but she has pretty good grappling. In her last 2 fights, she won them by submission, so she's got pretty solid grappling, at least on paper. And Kareckaite is arguably 2-4-1. She's 5-1-1, that's what her record says, but 3 of her 5 wins are by split decision. She's never won a unanimous decision. Her first 2 wins were by finish, but since then, in the last 5.5 years, she hasn't gotten a single finish. Only won by split decision. And so she started off 2-0 and then has gone 3-1-1 since then. One of those being a unanimous decision loss, one of them being a unanimous decision draw, and 3 of them being unanimous or split decision wins. So arguably 2-4-1. She's a pretty big favorite in this fight. Again, I don't know why. She's a decent striker. No, she's pretty bad. She's a bad striker. She's not a grappler. Caliari is a pretty good striker with good grappling and finishing potential on the ground, which is rare in women's MMA. So I'm going to take Caliari to win. She didn't look amazing on the contender series, but Kareckaite, arguably 2-4, which she wouldn't be in the UFC if she was 2-4. She would be a massive favorite if she was 2-4. So I'm taking Caliari to win this fight. Now, I'm not going to watch it, but I think Caliari is probably going to win. All right, next fight on the card, we've got an exciting prospect, Jacobe Smith versus Preston Parsons. Jacobe Smith, coming off of his win on the contender series, a very good grappler. He's a All-American wrestler. He's undefeated in MMA, 9-0. And Preston Parsons, his best win is Matthew Semmelsberger. So I'm taking Jacobe Smith. He's a pretty big favorite again. A lot of the fights on this card, it's big favorites versus big favorite prospects versus, washed up veterans. Preston Parsons isn't terrible. He's got some good performances against some decent guys, but hasn't been able to put together solid wins at the top level. So I'm taking Jacobe Smith. I think he could actually be pretty decent at welterweight. His striking is relatively untested, but he's 9-0. He hasn't been chinned yet, and he's a really good grappler. So I'm going to trust him to use his grappling to beat a guy like Preston Parsons. Next fight of the card, this one's pretty hard to pick. It's Thiago Moises versus Trey Ogden. Both of these guys are just very solid lightweights, but tend to lose when they fight the top level guys. Moises losses to Ludovic Kline, Islam Makhachev, but he's got some good wins like Bobby Green and Christos Giagos, and he was able to take Islam into the 4th round, and he beat an 8-1 guy in his last win with leg kicks. So he's decent, but not great. And then similar story with Trey Ogden, good fight with Will Rajapov, but he has been historically poor against pretty good grapplers, pretty good jiu-jitsu, like Jordan Levitt. So I'm going to take Moises to win this, just using his grappling. He's got good enough striking. He's got a couple, standing TKOs, a couple finishes on the feet, and I don't think he's going to get completely outworked by Trey Ogden, who's got a win over Huber, I think. Who's a good striker. So I think Ogden's got decent striking, and I think Moises is slightly worse striking, but I think he's got good enough grappling to give Ogden some struggles, kind of like Jordan Levitt did. Next fight at the card, we've got another pretty big favorite prospect versus a guy who's not having a great run right now. We've got 12-1 Marco Tulio versus 21-7 Ihor Potieria. Tulio is on an 8-fight win streak. In that win streak, he had 2 fights on the Contender Series. This is his UFC debut. He beat Yusri Belgawi, I don't know how to pronounce his name, who is a glory kickboxer who fought Adesanya, he fought Pereira. So he's a really good striker, and Tulio was able to neutralize his striking, use the grappling, and beat him. And he also got another win on the Contender Series with a win on the regional scene in between. Like I said, 8-fight winning streak. Potieria, on the other hand, 2-5 in the UFC. His only wins in the UFC are over Shogun Rua in 2023. Not a very good win. A guy like probably 18, 20 years removed from his prime. And Robert Brychek, kind of a nobody, not a very good fighter. So I'm taking Marco Tulio. I don't know if he's gonna outstrike Potieria or grappling or whatever, but Potieria is not terrible, but not in a great run right now. Guy with a lot of momentum versus a guy with not a lot of momentum. I'm taking Tulio to get the win. Next fight of the card, we've got Jose Johnson versus Felipe Bunes. Jose Johnson, interesting fighter, 16-9, not a very good record, but pretty solid prospect. He's kind of young. Bunes, 34 years old. He's being kind of billed as the prospect, which is interesting. Both these guys have very ugly records, 16-9 versus 13-7. But Johnson, I just feel like he's a pretty good stylistic matchup. He's a 6-foot tall flyweight, very tall. That's tall for lightweight even, and he's a flyweight. He's got a win over Jack Cartwright on the Contender Series, who was the Cage Warriors champion, and Chad Anneliger. Now I will say, I think Cartwright a little overrated. Right before he came to the UFC, he fought Sylvester Miller. Go watch that fight if you haven't already. It's a very strange fight. Sylvester Miller, not a very good guy. I think he's like 10-7 now. Maybe he's a good guy, but he's not a very good fighter. His in that fight, he was winning against Jack Cartwright, who is this undefeated champion, and he kept getting on top of him, trying to throw hammer fist, and then using his head with the hammer fist and just landing headbutts from Cartwright's guard. And he got disqualified, but he's winning that fight. He was in round 4, and he was like on his way to win. And Cartwright gets the win by DQ. He's going to win anyways because Miller got like 5 points taken for headbutts. But he got warned like 6 times stop throwing headbutts, and he kept going and throwing them. And since then, Jack Cartwright has looked okay. He had 2 losses after that. He lost to Jose Johnson and someone else, I think, in Cage Warriors. But he's looked like a decent prospect, which made Jose Johnson look good with that win. But I know that Jack Cartwright might be a little overrated. He's losing to a guy like Sylvester Miller. So And then Jose Johnson has another win over Chad Anlier. That being said, I'm still going to pick Jose Johnson. I think Bunes, not very good. He's 0-1 in the UFC. He's fought 2 guys who have been in the UFC. He fought Joshua Van in the UFC, got knocked out, and he fought Josier Formiga in LFA, who was formerly a UFC contender. And he lost both those fights. 0-2 against people who are UFC level. Jose Johnson, not the best UFC fighter, but I think he's good enough, especially with his size, to beat a guy like Bunes or Boons, however you say his name. Also, again, Bunes being billed kind of as a prospect. He's 34 years old. That's kind of crazy. 34 years old, 13-7 prospect. Why do you sign a guy like that? Maybe it's short notice. I don't really remember. But yeah, Jose Johnson, I just feel like he's more UFC level than Boons or Bunes. Next out of the card, we've got Uros Medic versus Punahele Soriano. Uros Medic 10-2, Soriano 10-4. Interesting, Medic is a former lightweight, Soriano is a former middleweight, fighting at welterweight, and Medic is bigger than Soriano. I mean, he's not bigger. He's got a bigger frame though. He is taller. He's got a longer reach. And I think Medic, because of that height advantage and because of his speed advantage and his being a former lightweight, I think he's going to win. He's more technical on the feet. He's a pretty solid grappler. He did get out-grappled pretty handily by Mukhtabek Oralbai, but Soriano I don't think is nearly that level of grappler. Maybe he's bigger, but he's not going to be able to hold a guy down like that. And I just think Soriano's coming from a lower skill division at middleweight. He's had less success in the UFC at a lower skill division, and he's been finished by Roman Kopylov before, who's like the only really technical striker he's faced. Even though Medic is coming from a lightweight, like a lighter weight class, he's still got the power to finish guys at welterweight. He knocked out what's his name? Whoever he fought last, he knocked him out cold in the first round. His name's slipping me, but Soriano, he's going to get hit, and Medic has shown that if he's going to hit a guy, got a pretty good chance of putting him out. So I'm picking Medic to probably finish Soriano in the first or second round. Yeah, next round of the card, we've got Austin Bashi versus Christian Rodriguez. This is another, when I say interesting fight, I think it's interesting that the fight got made. Not a lot of these fights probably won't be entertaining, but Austin Bashi, Christian Rodriguez. Bashi is 13-0. Again, another undefeated prospect coming to this card. He's a very good grappler. He's got good finishing potential, especially on the ground. And, being 13-0 in MMA, you've got decent MMA abilities just flat out. He's probably not going to gas super early. He's probably not going to get chinned very easily. He's got the same amount of fights as Christian Rodriguez, and it's like being billed as a prospect versus veteran fight. And Christian Rodriguez, he's pretty solid. In the UFC recently, he's been put against, before his Erosa fight, which he lost, he's been put against a lot of similar fighters to Bashi. He got put against Cameron Simon, Raul Rosas Jr., and Isaac Dolgarian. All of those guys really good prospects, really highly touted, and really good grapplers. And he beat all 3 of them. Now, Cameron Simon, he clearly beat, but he missed weight. Raul Rosas Jr., same thing. He clearly beat him, but he missed weight. He didn't miss weight against Dolgarian, but Dolgarian, in my opinion, clearly won rounds 1 and 2, probably a 10-8 in round 1, and then got 10-8'd in round 3. So, in my opinion, that fight should have been scored towards Dolgarian, maybe a draw, but somehow 2 of the judges gave round 2 to Rodriguez, and Rodriguez won that fight. So, interesting fight. You can go watch that fight, make of it what you will. But that showed me that Rodriguez is probably going to get out-grappled pretty easily by Bashi. And I think Bashi's probably going to finish him in a way that Dolgarian has proven he's not really able to do super easily. All right. Next fight at the card, Roman Kopylov versus Chris Curtis. Kind of an easy fight to pick, in my opinion. Chris Curtis, he's a good striker, but he's not a great striker. He's not very technical, and he has a kind of propensity to get frustrated against technical strikers. Even Marc-Andre Barriault, who's not a technical striker, frustrated him by not just running at him. Chris Curtis doesn't really cut the cage. He's getting old. Kopylov has improved drastically in his last 5 fights. He hasn't been outstruck by anyone but Cesar Almeida, who's a very good striker, like I said. Kopylov, I think, will just outstrike Chris Curtis, use kicks. Now, Chris Curtis is good at countering kicks, but I don't think he's good enough to beat a guy like Roman Kopylov. So, next fight of the card, we've got Cesar Almeida versus Abdul Razak-Alhassan. Cesar Almeida, like I said before, only losses to Kopylov. He was outstriking him, but Kopylov was able to use the grappling to neutralize him and get a close decision win. And Almeida's fighting Abdul Razak-Alhassan, who has never won a decision in his career. And I think that's important to know, because when you look at game plans and paths to victory, what is Alhassan going to do? He's not going to outstrike a glory kickboxer in Almeida, a guy who's got a win over Pereira and a 3-inch height advantage. He's not going to outstrike him. Alhassan got outgrappled by Joe Pyfer, and maybe he can outgrapple Almeida, but he's never won a decision in his career. I don't think, tomorrow night's going to be the night where he does it. So, he's got decent enough grappling to maybe hold Almeida down for a round or two, but I don't think he's going to be able to survive 3 rounds against a really good striker, especially when he has a tendency to, try to brawl and try to get a finish on the feet. And I don't think he's going to outstrike Almeida. I don't think he's going to take on a decision. Therefore, I don't think he's going to win. Next fight of the card. I don't really care about this fight. It's Ponzinibbio versus Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Carlson-Harris. Both these guys way past their prime. I mean, maybe not Carlson-Harris, but Ponzinibbio way past his prime. Pretty washed. This is kind of a who's last wash fight. I'm picking Ponzinibbio because he looked a little bit better in his last couple fights, and mainly because he's the favorite, and this is kind of a coin flip fight. I'd prefer if the UFC just made this fight and then cut both of them, because I guarantee this fight's not going to be very entertaining, and if it is, it's probably going to be Carlson-Harris getting knocked out in like a minute because he doesn't grapple, even though he's a grappler. So I'm picking Ponzinibbio to just probably find his chin eventually. Main event, we've got Mackenzie Dern versus Amanda Ribas. I think this fight's pretty easy to pick too. This fight has happened before. This is a rematch. Amanda Ribas won the first fight. She probably improved more than Dern. If you didn't watch the first fight, the result was Dern, better grappler, worse striker. Ribas used her striking to make distance and prevent Dern from getting takedowns or getting in the clinch. And she just outstruck Dern over 15 minutes. I know this fight's 25 minutes. Maybe that'll be harder to do. But, I mean, Dern, this has been the story of her career recently. She just fights people if they aren't willing to get in the grappling with her. She can't get anything going, and she loses. So I think Ribas has probably improved more than Dern since the first fight. It's just going to do more of the same and just prevent the grappling, use straight down the middle strikes, create distance, and prevent the grappling. And Dern's not going to be able to get anything going, and she's going to lose. So my prediction, Amanda Ribas. Let me know if you think of my predictions in the comments. Like the video, subscribe, do all that. Follow me on Twitter. All those links will be in the description. That is all. Thanks for watching.